Hello there and welcome. My name's Fiona from Weekly Sewing Bee, and today I am making dwarf boots, dwarf slippers. Okay, I'm going to be basing the sorry, these are filthy. They really should be thrown away. I'm going to be using the same design as you would on one of these booties. Now, the boots that I'm doing here are more Gimli boots from Lord of the Rings. Okay, so that's one piece of cloth that curves round, and then the other piece of cloth that goes here. Now, the measurements that I'm going to need are the fattest part of my foot and ankle, and I'm also going to draw around the outside of my foot. Okay, that's for my sole, and then I'm going to add hem allowance, and then they should be quite comfortable as slippers. Okay, now where am I? Okay, before I go any further, yeah, I'm going to put the link up in the comments to these ones. These are jester slippers that I did ages ago, but I just thought they might work for you. So, dwarf slippers. So, more Gimli from Lord of the Rings than Seven Dwarfs. What I'm going to do as well is I have here foam tiles. Now they come in A4, but I'm sure they come in every size. And I'm going to use these for the metal work around the outside of the boot. And it is a simple matter of cutting, and I'm going to stick to a Celtic design just because it works so well, and I'm pretty sure that in the film The Lord of the Rings, Gimli has Celtic designs on his armour. So that's that. The way I do it is I cut it, but you can kind of have to etch in, and if I fold that I can then etch in. So I'm going to be doing a rim of that to represent the ironwork around the edge of his boots, and they literally go on the soles. Fabric that I'm going to use for the lining of the sole, I'm just going to use cotton. For the lining of the shoe, which is optional, I'm going to use fleece material because it's lovely. And then for the outside, I'm going to be using UPVC sort of fake leatherette. Okay. Now, I know where to start. So first of all, we need our pattern. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the boot, and then I'm going to make the lining. So if you don't need the lining, then you've just got the information to make the boot. So I need a piece to just trace around my sole. So I'm going to put my foot flat down and just draw around the outside, and then I'm going to need a few other pieces just to mould around the slippers. Okay. That was boring, wasn't it? Alright, so I'm going to start off with my sole of my shoe. I'm going to switch camera off. So welcome back. Okay. Now, I've cut out my sole. Now, if you can get hold of, I don't know how well you can see it actually, probably not very well. This is protective lining for a table, but it's nice because it's got a bit of grip. But if you can't get hold of that, what we're going to use is leatherette, but we're not going to use the leather side, we're just going to use the backing, so it's got some grip. I've also, whilst I did it, I cut out the lining for the soles, just for the inside, because even if you don't line it, you're still going to want a little bit of protection. Alright, now, cut out my ankle bit, and what I'm going to do here is I've draped over a piece of fabric, and I'm literally going to draw around this so that I know that it works. Now you can do this in paper, but obviously the fabric gives it a subtle amount of grip. So I've just done a line there, which is probably not enough for you to see, but it is enough for me to use as a guide. So that's what I'm left with. I'm going to give myself a hem allowance because I like myself and I want them to actually fit afterwards. Okay, and all I'm doing now is cutting 1/2 inch around the outside of the line that I just drew. And I've done it in a soft mouldable fabric. So then I can take this template and then I can transfer the information onto my leatherette. So yes, not too complicated that way. And then very, very simple. Just going to draw around there. In fact, I do need my leatherette slightly larger than my lining, but that's only so that I don't sort of feel as if everything's stuffed into the boot. And then I can just quickly cut round that line. So I have all my component parts now, although obviously I've got to do a bit more on the metal work for the bottom, but I can easily come back to that. Okay, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to ignore the lining for now. So if you're watching this through and you don't want the lining, then you can just skip that bit. Alright, now even though I know that my tube that I've got here, this is the tube that goes up, is going to come in slightly here, I'm not going to cut that. What I'm going to do is when everything's in position, then I'm going to use that as a template. So I know I might even over sew. Alright, and this needs to be large enough than the widest part of your foot, so your ankle footy bit that joins together. And it's just going to be a tube. Alright, got my sewing machine set up. What we can't do is sew with a small stitch. If we sew this fabric with a small stitch, we're just going to perforate it and then it's going to rip. Now it is very strong fabric and it does sort of mould and it does sort of stretch like real leather. But we are going to use a slightly larger stitch than we would normally. And instead of sort of 2.2, I've gone for 3. So, but it is important to know. Okay, I'm going to keep my pattern safe, because rather than redo the pattern, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to turn it over when I do the one for the other foot. I'm going to keep my backing of this on the outside. So it is going to be a bit confusing, because normally I'd say right side to right side, but I'm actually going to say right side to the right side of this. And in fact, what I can do, just to remind myself, is take a marker and write, well, I'm not going to write R, because otherwise I'm going to go right and left and it's the left, but I'm just going to put an arrow on it. Now that's a universal sewing symbol, honestly, an arrow. So what I've got here is, I'm going to start at the top. I've got them laid out. I can pin this before I want to sew, but in a way it's going to make it more difficult for me. Now when you're sewing two pieces like this together, a curve, always put the flat piece on the bottom so that you can pull the thing that curves round. So what I'm doing is I'm making sure the sewing machine is sewing around the bottom of this curve, and then I am easing the curve of the top round onto it. So that's that. And I know that I don't want this far along, because it's all the way pretty much down to my toes. So that was easy enough. I'm going to do the other side now, which is going to be slightly more dramatic for you. So I'm going to start again at the middle. I'm going to give myself as much chance as I can with this. So I've got my hand through here firmly on the sole, and I am going to turn the sole so that I'm keeping my hem allowance, but I'm going to ease the fold of this cloth around the top. And then I'm just going to let the sewing machine sew it. Now, one of the things you've got to do is not turn too early. There we are. So that's that. I'm going to take all this out of the machine, and I can quickly just turn this round so you can see where we are. Yeah? Alright, I now have my tube. I'm going to turn right side to right side. Now, if you did want to hem the top, I would use binding. Now, this seam is going to go down the back of my foot. And the only thing I know for sure is this is a rectangle, and I know it's wide enough to slide my foot inside and out. So I'm going to keep that inside out, and I'm going to refold this round. Now, I know that my foot is probably going to start, I'm going to need to cut it down to there. So I can mark that. I'm going to need to get rid of this piece of material so that I can walk. I know that my heel is going to go here, and I'm going to have to sew this all together. So if I lie that down flat, and I've folded my sole here, and I have got that nick that I just decided that I'm going to need to walk. Going to need that to walk. So I'm going to make believe this is the invisible line and my sole is folded. So I'm going to lay that down on top of that, lining up that mark with that. Okay. I have a pencil here that I can see, so I can draw down this line. Now this line is then from the neck to the sole. And I can trim it now, or I can do this all in one go. And I am going to then take this again, so it's folded as flat as possible, and I can copy this arc down here. So that's what I'm left with. What I've done now is I've opened it out so that I have got my centre of my tube, folded it open, and I'm going to place the sole on so that the right side is out. Okay, I know in some ways it would have been better if I'd have got hold of this cloth, but it's like I don't want you to waste money on ingredients, as it were. So here we go. I've got now the back of my slipper to be attached to my sole halfway. And I'm doing it halfway so that I don't cause myself too many problems. I'm literally pulling the sole round and I'm making sure that I've got nothing caught up. I'm just now joining the sole and the shoe to the tube of the ankle, and as soon as that's firmly on, I'm going to leave my needle down and I'm going to get rid of that sole. So I'm now on the upper part of the shoe. I can probably ease that round slightly so that I've got a bit more room to sew. So let's turn the sewing machine. So we've got the top of the shoe and the ankle part, and I'm going to sew to the point of that bit. Okay, take that out. Now, I'm left-handed, so this is quite easy for me to sew both sides round and turn it inside out, so I've got my fabric on this side. But yeah, it's one of those things, and I hope you can deal. So now what I've got to do is I've got to join this to this. Now we know that the tube, I didn't give myself any leeway with the hem allowance, so we've just got to try and make that fit. And we can join that up together. And it's the same as before. We sew a little bit on the sole, and then we sew the tube, and then we sew the top of the slipper. Lovely. So what we're left with, and we can just tidy up the excess with a bead. So it does look more like a slipper now. I'm going to turn it round the right way round. Now this information is relevant to any boot, boot style slipper, not just leatherette dwarf style. So you know the information, and it's cut to your foot size, so it's yours and yours alone. Alright, so if I was just making them for, I don't know, Halloween or a party, then I'm pretty much done. When I cut out the sole of the boot, I also cut out 2 linings, whizzing around with the sewing machine. And then I'm going to turn this inside out and then stuff it. And this is just so that it is wearable. And I'm going to leave a hole so I can turn it inside out, because I do that a lot. Alright, yes, and then the way I'm going to attach this is I have glue, I have fabric glue. It won't work very well. I'm just going to tack it on with a few stitches, and then I have my Celtic style dwarf boots. The only thing I would suggest is that if you want to make sure you can get your foot in. So, and we've done our yoga this morning. It's that bit. You've got to measure that bit, and it's got to be big enough to get your foot in. So that's that. So if you don't want to line it, you can switch it off now. Alright, so we now have to make the lining. Now this is easy enough. We have our component parts, we have this, and if I just do that. I've got nice large stitches so I can do that. I'm going to turn it inside out and I'm literally just going to stuff it. I know it's 20 minutes. Okay. Do I pause it? I pause it. Hi, so welcome back. I have turned the sole of my slipper inside out. I have my pieces there. I'm just going to tuck in this end here. And I'm going to mark that with a pin. Now again, the ankle part of this is not sewn, is not cut. So I'm going to start at the centre. I can mark that with a pin. And whereas in the leatherette I sewed it half and then sewed it half again, I think we can quite easily get away with sewing this in one go. So I'm going to place it under the sewing machine. And I am sewing through the turned inside out fluffy sole. Now the reason I'm doing that is because I'm quite happy to do that. Now you don't want this overstuffed because it will just be lumpy and bumpy and really uncomfortable to wear. But a little bit of stuffing to protect yourself from the cold, that's not a bad thing at all. So same as before, I'm just joining the bottom to the top. So I am turning the sole and I am sewing the sole, and then I am placing which bit of this I want over there. So, and it is all practice, it really is, and it'll just make your sewing so much more fun. So there we are, and I've come down to the point that I'm happy with the sole. Okay, so even though it's a stretch fabric, I've got more fabric than I need. I know I've got enough just to get it in my foot, and I've got my sole attached. I'm going to take my tube again, which I know is slightly smaller than my leatherette. What are you saying? Okay. Now, normally my machine will quite happily sew loads of different fabrics, but normally I sew on a 2.2, 2.5 style stitch. And what I've been doing is I've been sewing with a larger stitch just to get the non-rippy of the... Yeah, so the machine is saying I don't like it. So I've put it back to its normal stitch, and I will have to remember to turn that round when the time comes. So I've got my tube, which I know fits my ankle, which I know fits inside my leatherette. I'm leaving the stitches on the outside, and again I am lining up my sole. I'm going to trim it now rather than worry. So I'm going to get rid of the excess from this side because I stretched it. Which is fine. And I'm going to take it to the point where I know that my foot will bend. So I've opened it out now, going over one side and going over the other. And if you want, and you're very careful of that pin, because we still haven't sewn up the hole, we can double check. I'm going to just eye it up, okay? So, oh, I never measured that, cut that. Oh, gosh. with a fold, and I know that I just need a very simple V taken out of here. Now the only problem with doing it this way, doing one shoe and then the other, ideally you want to do the same shoes at the same, you want to do the pair at the same time, so that the pattern is then the same for both shoes. It's okay for this purpose, but what I would be then doing is making the other one. So I still haven't sewn this up. This is where I turned it inside out for my stuffing, so I've got to keep an eye on that. What I'm now going to do is I'm now going to open this out so that I have the point at the back of my foot, and I'm going to take the back of my foot and then place it there. Now because I am squeezing the tube onto the foot, I'm going to place the foot under, because the foot is my flat thing. Alright, now so that my seams are all on the inside, on the outside, I haven't turned this inside out. Okay, now before I get too far, what I'm going to do is mentally I'm going to line up the top halfway point and the top halfway point of that, and I'm going to sew to that point. And now I can mark it with a pin, and so I'm now off the sole and I'm down the side of the shoe. I'm just lifting my needle and I'm pushing the sole out of the way. So let's turn it slightly so you can see, and I need to sew the tube now to the top of my shoe. I'm making sure that my sole doesn't push out my stitches, because it sort of pushes it away from the needle. It's a bit of a pain. One of those times that I say do it once, check it, and then do it again. So now it's entirely up to you whether we sew all the way around now. We now get to the point of the top where the top and halfway along the tube meet, or we can put our needle down, we can push this sole out of the way again, and we can pull it round so we've got the top and we've got the other side of the tube. Now when you are doing this, do make sure that you don't bend your needle, because that is something that can happen. A couple of stitches just to get it going, and then I can rejoin everything. So any gathering that I'm going to do pretty much at the top here. So I'm just coming down the side of the slipper, and it is, you know, like I've got size 4 feet. I'm not particularly big on the foot area, so you can see how difficult this is, and it's going to be fiddly for children's size shoes, but that's fine. You've just got to do one stitch at a time. So there we are. Hopefully we've got everything attached, and if it's not, then what I would do is this, I've sewn it from this side, I would turn it over and just sew it from the other side, just so that I could get everything in. I'm now going to turn it inside out just to check it, to check that I've popped those seams properly. So there we are. Easy enough. I'm going to turn it round the other way. Yeah, it's going to be easier to fix now than it is later. I'm going to take my boot, because this is the lining to a slipper. I'm going to turn this inside out, and I can trim off any excess because it might be uncomfortable. If you've got a piece like this, then that might rub. So what I now need to do is, now I'm 100% sure, because I have the right side on the inside, I'm going to put the right side of this slipper on the inside. So I'm still right side to right side. I'm going to push my toe in just to keep it out of the way. Now the easiest seam to mark up is the back seam with the back seam here. So what I'm going to do, take a pin and I'm going to mark that seam. Now I'm going to find halfway between the top, so I'm folding it flat, and I'm folding the lining flat as well, so that I can just get that halfway. I'm going to put halfway between the two, and then I'm going to start to sew, and obviously I'm going to enlarge my stitch again. Okay, I don't need to worry about the tension in the bottom. The reason that I don't need to worry about the tension in the bottom is that I'm using a good quality thread, so it can cope with it. Now I've got the seam in my sight, as it were. I've taken my pin out, because I was only using my pin as a marker. Wiggle that through. I don't need to leave a hole to turn it inside out, and I can literally just sew back to the joining of the front. Okay, making sure that I've got nothing caught up, and if I have, then I'm going to take it out of the machine and just sort it out. Sometimes you get your bobbin thread caught up. So I now have an excess of threads. I'm going to pick up where I left off and carry on sewing. And when I've come back to the original line of stitching, I'm going to stitch over those stitches. I don't want to sort of reverse over them or anything else like that. I want to keep it as neat as possible. Now, how do we do this again? I've forgotten. Oh, perhaps you do need some way to turn it inside out. Yes, you probably do. Oh, do you know, I have that light at the end of the tunnel feeling. Okay, so I don't want my join to be on the rim of my bootie because it's going to be very visible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unpick some stitches at the back of my lining. Now I'm not going to do it on the bottom bit here because that bit will rub. I'm going to do it in between the bottom and the top. And the hole needs to be big enough so that I can get a couple of fingers in and I can literally go right to the toe and I can pull that inside out. Now I can hand sew this hole up, or I can then just run it through on the machine. It just really depends what sort of finish you want to go for and the length of time that somebody will be wearing this, because that needs to be considered. If it's going to be a daily thing, then we wouldn't want it to rub. So now I've got all my seams on the inside, and I literally have my point of my toe in my thumb and my forefinger, and I am going to ram it in the toe. So, there we are. And if I'm lucky, I can hold the lining and the toe, and then I can just push through the rest of this. And in fact, the best way to push through it is actually to put your foot in it. Now, one of my pet hates with slippers is when they the lining comes loose, when they get a bit old. And it does happen. Now in commercially bought shoes there'd be a line of glue and everything else like that. Now I don't want to use that line of glue, but I am going to just put a couple of stitches in. So because we made the lining slightly smaller, you can see that it's given that nice curve to the top. And we also need to decorate it with our ironwork. Okay, well that's easy enough, isn't it? Isn't it? Alright, I will put the link of the jester's shoes, and what I'm going to do next is I'm quickly going to make a shoe cover. You'll see these a lot in like costumes anyway, so it will make perfect sense. Alright, thank you ever so much for your patience, and thank you ever so much for watching.